Tom Campbell here. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
The following two questions have been re-recorded. How should one deal with the fear of losing property when living in a rough environment such as developing countries where law and order is weak? Police are not much help, neighbors are usually okay, but a particular family roams around with armed personnel and is involved in criminal activities such as land grabbing when the situation allows. Such criminal activities are not the norm, but they do happen, and one might not have the capacity to confront them in a direct fight. How should somebody deal with such a scenario? Stand one's ground and be a hero, or run away instead of facing a tougher opponent? What are your thoughts on dealing with such a fear?
Well, it depends, of course, on every individual situation. There's no one pronouncement that will address all such things. You have to look at the long-term consequences. Look at the long-term consequences in terms of entropy produced. If you take action A, which is, stand your ground, push back, you'll have to see what are the likely consequences, what's likely to happen. And you can go over in your mind maybe 2 or 3 or 4 different scenarios. Well, here's the things that I think are likely to happen. Here's the next most likely thing, and just kind of go through those, write them down if you want. It makes it easier if you just write those down. What are the possibilities that are going to happen? And make the ones that are most likely at the top of the list and more and less likely as you go down the list. And then do the same thing. What if I do it the other way? What if I acquiesce and, bow my head and apologize or do whatever, or suck it up and let them steal my property? What if I do that? Okay, what are the long-term consequences? And by long-term, I mean over the next, well, it depends on the situation, what defines long-term, but typically long-term means like years out, not just weeks out, but months, years, maybe even a decade out, long-term. What's the consequences? Now look at those different sets of consequences and think about the entropy that's produced, and you can think of that and what kind of harm comes to how many people? What kind of suffering is created for how many people? And kind of that's what I call doing due diligence on, long-term consequences in terms of entropy. So once you've done that analysis, it's usually good to take to wait a while and do it again, because you'll find your answers will change as you think about it from different directions and different possibilities. Often, if it's something that really may have dire consequences, I'll actually go and kind of work through it in a meditation state, go kind of into the database and kind of fast forward. What does this look like? Where does this go in, a year or 2 years? What does this go? How does this go? How does this play out? And look at all these different possibilities. Then, again, 3 or 4 or 5 days later, I'll go and I'll repeat the exercise. And often, like I say, I surprise myself that I come up with different answers each time, because there's sometimes I'll see things, something that I discovered on the last time I went through the process now triggers something else, which changes my answers altogether. Eventually, I get to the point where I feel like the answer's stable. It hasn't changed. I come up with the same answer each time. I look over it, and that seems to be the low entropy path. When you find the low entropy path, and it's not just for you, but for everybody else involved in it, because there's going to be lots of people. You don't live on an island. Things aren't just going to affect you. Choices you make are going to affect other people. And those other people may have to make different choices which yet affect other people. And those people will have to make different choices which will affect other people. So you have to look at the unintended consequences, find your low entropy path, and then do it and deal with the consequences. So the answer could be to stand up and fight back. To that might end it, or that may create even a bigger problem. That may be a foolish thing to do. So there's not just one answer for that. But MBT is not a pacifist philosophy. There are times when you need to just say no. You need to stand up, and you need to be firm about it and accept the consequences of what that means. Of what might happen. And there's other times when the best thing to do is turn the other cheek and to let things go. And the only way to know which way to go is to do the due diligence on looking at how the long-term entropy ends up. Not just you, but all the people that your decision affects. And then the people and those people, how they affect other people. So look at it out as far as you can. So Abdul, that's the way I'd say to assess the problem. I don't know whether in your circumstance the thing would be to, go buy a gun and stand up, or whether the thing is to, don't buy the gun, but stand up, or the thing would be to, to bow your head and take the less aggressive way out. It just depends on where all that leads. You see, there's no right answer to that. Only the one you come up with. And once you decide what it is, then be flexible, because sometimes there are unintended consequences. Sometimes you'll start down a path and you'll say, uh-oh, I didn't figure on this. I didn't expect that. Well, now you have to do a reevaluation and maybe change your plan. So don't get so hard over that you get inflexible after you've made your decision.
What about running away? Is that okay, or is that a fearful thing to do in general?
No, running away, if it solves the problem better than anything else, is not a bad solution. It depends on what you leave behind. If you run away, and by running away, you cause lots of other people to have terrible problems that they wouldn't have had otherwise, well, then that's maybe high entropy. On the other hand, if running away just takes you and yours out of harm's way, and it's something that you can do and it doesn't really hurt other people, then that may be a good thing to do. Depends on how much running away costs. How much do you leave behind? How much does it, what the cost is, and what's the benefit? If the benefit that, in 2 or 3 years, everybody recovers and lives happily ever after, well, that's a pretty good benefit of running away. It just depends. But no, there's no problem with retreating. A retreat is a very reasonable thing to do in some cases. That's your best option. So there's nothing wrong with a surrender. Surrender sometimes is your best option. There's also nothing wrong with a charge. Sometimes that's your best option. You'll just have to figure that. But there's nothing fundamentally wrong with surrendering or retreating. If that's the low entropy path for everybody, then that's the better path to take.
Perfect. And I do have another question. I've been listening to you for quite some time now, but it seems that your ideas have not really entered my being level and continue to be at the intellectual level as I continue to be easily affected by stress of daily life, such as finances, family quarrels, work, etc. So what can I do to get that more at my being level?
Think more about application and not just theory. Okay, if you're just listening to me and it's intellectual, that's all theory. To get it to the being level, you have to do it. You have to apply it. And that means you have to think about everything you do and why you do it. What the ramifications in the long-term entropy is of all your actions for yourself and for others. If you get upset and annoyed with things, then think about how has that played out? How has your anger helped or hurt the situation? How has your anger and your upset and your anxiety, how has that played out? What are the results and consequences of your being anxious or upset? Well, you'll probably find that all the consequences of you being angry or upset or annoyed are not positive. Most of the consequences of that just add to the problem and make things worse. So when you look at that and, now you have the choice: do I continue making things worse, or do I change what it is I'm doing? So it's taking a very, direct awareness, a direct action. Being aware of everything you do, why you're doing it, and what the consequences are. So if you find yourself getting upset and getting anxiety, think, why? Why does this upset me? Well, because it's so unfair. Well, what about fairness? Life is not fair. There's no guarantee of fairness. It just is the way it is. And then you have to deal with it. It's not, complaining about the fairness of life is useless. It's about how do you deal with it that's important. And how do you deal with it in a way that minimizes entropy for the system, for you and for all the people around you. So once you take it seriously that this does affect my life, it does affect my choices, things get better or worse depending on how I make my choices and how I affect other people, then you start to feel an obligation. You start to feel a seriousness about every choice you make. So you get angry and that's not helping. And if it doesn't help you, then it doesn't help all the people that depend on you and all the people that associate with you. It's not helpful to any of them. So being aware of your choices and all your interactions and how it affects the people around you should give you the energy necessary to change your behavior, to apply the things that you've learned here with MBT to your life. And you don't have to jump in with some kind of, grand thing. You can just kind of stick your toe in the water first before you, jump into the deep end. You can say, well, let me just try it on this one thing and see if that helps. I'll try being positive here and see how that works out. Or I'll put my foot down here and demand that stuff stop. Or I'll run away. You can make these choices, but do it consciously, not just because you're upset. I guess that's the thing that you hear often. It says, live in the moment, be aware, be here now, be aware of everything you do, its consequences and why you do it. And then you will be able to apply it. But if you just let life go by and you do things because that's the way you feel, then typically nothing changes. Patterns repeat. Negative issues just stay. Nothing really changes much. The players and the characters may change, but the same drama keeps playing itself out over and over again. Does that help you out any?
It does. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I can't give you any really specific answer unless, I really understood a specific problem, and you'll just have to work that, out on your own.
Carolyn's next. Thank you.
Hello, Tom.
Hello, Carolyn.
I wanted to ask how to deal with authenticity if it's not being well perceived, and if you end up in an argument with the other person, even though you have the intent to grow up and act in a loving way, but sort of still express how you're feeling.
Well, you need to grow up in a way that not only lowers entropy for you, but lowers entropy for everybody. So as you grow up, be aware of how you affect other people. And if your effect on other people is negative, but you see that on your path to growing up, well, the first thing I'd do would be I'd talk with them, those other people, and say, look, I'm trying something out to see how it fits, or how does it work? Or maybe you don't have to actually act it out. Maybe you can just talk to them and they'll tell you how they're going to react to it, how it would make them feel without you having to do it. So you're growing up. You have to be aware that you're not growing up again alone on an island, that the choices you make affect other people. So you have to make choices that help you grow up, maybe explore things, but you have to do it in a way that is minimum damage to your environment. So you have to think about not only yourself, but how you affect other people. So let's say that that you have rage. I know this is not your case, but I'm just going to make this up. Let's say you have rage over something and you always stuff it. You always hold it back. You don't vent it, but you have this rage and you think, well, I just like to let that rage go and see how that feels and see where it goes. And maybe that'll help me grow up. Well, find a way to do that alone. Find a way to, go crawl in a hole all by yourself and let the rage go there where it doesn't affect anybody else. Don't blow that rage right in a lot of people's face and see how it works, because it's liable to blow back at you then. You see, so you need to find ways to do what you need to do that don't hurt other people. So that's a little challenge. You can't just grow up. It's not like here's the steps I want to take, and everybody else is just going to have to deal with it. That's okay if everybody else can deal with it. And particularly if you tell them ahead of time, here's why I'm doing it. Here's what I'm going to do. It's only going to be temporary. I just need to get this out. Then they probably can take all kinds of stuff that they wouldn't want to live with, but they can take temporarily. So you could talk to them about that and see if you can get them to agree to it. But if they say, no, I don't think so, I can't go there, because I'll take it all personally, then I'll be upset. And then my upset will upset you, which will upset me. And the whole thing will just, blow up. Then you can't do that. You have to find some other way to grow yourself up. You have to find a way that you can be who you are without causing more trouble than it's worth. Maybe you have to go off by yourself for a while. Maybe you just need to, be alone for a week or two until you work those things out. Maybe you need to go someplace where nobody knows you to, do your growth. I don't know what the solution is, but you do have to be concerned about the people around you and how they will deal with what you're asking them to deal with. If they are really well grown and very solid in their own self-assurance, their own confidence, then they can probably take a lot, particularly if it's going to be a short period of time. But if they're not, if they have their own insecurities, their own needs and wants and desires and fears and beliefs and so on, then you're going to have to deal with that too. So it just depends on what's going on there. But you do have to be aware of other people and not hurt them. You can't just grow up at other people's expenses.
Well, what would be then? It's also a good way. So if something upsets me about another person, and if so a good way to communicate about it would be just to also do it by myself, to just work it out myself.
Well, there's a couple of things you can do. If there's something that upsets you about another person, then you have to realize that that's you. You choose to be upset when that thing happens. So it's you. It's not necessarily this other person. They're just being who they are, and you're being upset by it. So first thing to do is look at yourself and say, okay, why do I get upset by that? Why does this bother me so much? Why can't I just let that kind of roll, go in one ear and out the other, just kind of roll off my back? Why can't I deal with that without getting upset? And then try to fix yourself. And if you do that for a while, you could tell that other person, when you do these things, I have this negative reaction to it. So that perhaps they will try not to do those things because you have the negative reaction. But the best way to fix it is not to help them fix themselves, but to help yourself fix yourself. Work on you. Work on you. So find out why that upsets you. Why do you take that personally? Why is that something that upsets you? And try to deal with that fear so that it doesn't upset you, that you can just say, well, that's just the way they are. And if that's the way they are, that's okay with me. I can work around it. It's not that big a deal to get to that spot. So I'd say work on yourself as a solution first. But you can also tell a person, I mean, it's good to be honest with people. If somebody does things that pushes a button of yours that bothers you, it's fair enough to say, hey, this is the way I am. This pushes my button and I get upset. That's nothing wrong with that. That's just being honest to tell people that. But it's you who choose to get upset. It's they who choose to do something that pushes your button. So there's room for both people to find solutions. The button pusher can try to not push the button on you, and you can try to learn to not react that way when that button gets pushed, to kind of deactivate that button.
But is there also like boundaries you have to set up for yourself, or is that something that sort of comes naturally, like when you work on those fears?
Yeah, your buttons actually define boundaries. If a person has a whole lot of buttons, things that upset them, then that defines kind of the boundaries with which somebody else can interact with you. Well, they can't say this and they can't say that, and they need to do these other things this way. So your buttons define your boundaries. When you get rid of those buttons, which means when you get rid of that fear, then your boundaries are really pretty broad. Hardly nothing upsets you. Almost everything you can just kind of slides by. Nothing sticks, nothing hurts. You don't get upset. It leaves you in a pretty good place with very broad boundaries. Now, still you need some boundaries. Somebody just can't walk up to you and slap you or something. That's obviously violating a boundary that you should have. You need some boundaries, but if these are emotional things, then those boundaries will go away as you get rid of your fears. They'll expand, and you'll be able to accept people much better just the way they are. In other words, you interact with the good parts of people. If you have another person and there's 20 ways that you connect with each other, if 15 or 16 those are really, really nice and 3 or 4 hurt, well, if you get rid of those buttons that make them hurt, now you've got 15 ways that you can interact with this person that are really nice. And the other things just don't bother you. So now it can be a really good relationship. So it's very seldom that you're going to find other people and every possible way you could possibly interact with them is always wonderful. That's not likely. I mean, I guess it could happen, but basically people are people, and you're going to run into things in almost everybody that maybe they're not exactly the way you'd like it to be. But if it's not a big thing, if it's not a deal breaker, if it's not really a monster thing, then you need to just let that go and say, that's just the way they are. People aren't perfect. You're not perfect. There's things about you that probably annoy other people as well. See, you're not perfect. People aren't perfect. You're not perfect. So let's let the imperfections go. We don't need a perfect person. We just need a person that has enough positive things that I can interact with them and feel good being around them. Good enough. They don't have to be perfect. This other stuff, I just let it go. Not that important. 15 out of 20 is good. Even, 10 out of 20 is good if those 10 are really good things. And the rest of it just isn't that important. Accept it. It's the way they are. Maybe if you give them a real safe space by accepting it, they'll change it. Makes it easier for them to change it because their own buttons have to do with their own fears. And the way that you can help other people get rid of their fears is to give them a safe space. In other words, you don't react negatively to their belief or to their fear. That gives them a place where they can maybe overcome it. So it's surprising. The more you let these things that aren't to your liking go, the more likely they are that they'll be changed. The more you fuss about them and complain about them, the less likely it is that they'll be able to be changed.
Okay, thank you, Tom. That helps a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome, Caroline.
Tom, the next question comes from Nicholas E., and he is on audio only. He was here last time, but didn't get to ask his questions, so I'm going to read them. Nicholas is asking, For 3 or 4 years now, the advertising algorithm has been noticing my interest in the spiritual, and I notice a new space of intuitive people who charge for their skill set. What are your opinions of this? It should be better to charge for healing and answers than most of the other consulting out there, but what should we be careful about if we want to hire an intuitive person to get answers or receive healing?
I suspect recommendation would be one thing I would advise. Talk to people who have already experienced this person and see how satisfied they were, particularly if you can find people that have problems similar to your problems, to see whether they were successful with other people. So I'd ask for, give me a list of 5 or 6, 7 people that would give me recommendations, people that you've healed with a similar, here's my problem. If you ever done with this problem before? And if they say yes, you say, well, good. Give me some people, some recommendations that I can talk to, if that's possible. And they may not, because it depends on the problem. The problem is maybe something that's very private. They may not be able to give you that, but mostly they should be able to give you some people that you could talk to that would give you some sense of that. So recommendations would be a strong idea. Other than that, go in with something simple. Say, well, okay, I've got these 4 or 5 things wrong. Here's one of them. Let me just take this one and let's just work on that. And if that works out well, then maybe I'll bring up the others. Just pick one of the least expensive, least amount of time kind of things that you can do and just use that as a trial. See how that works. If that works really well, then take another one. If that works really well, then do another one. If the first one just bombs and it doesn't help you any, then I suspect that's enough. You could go, look for someone else. There's a lot of free services available for healing. You can Google healing circles or other such things, and you'll find that there are literally dozens and dozens of these healing circles. There's hundreds of people who are willing to heal and do other sorts of intuitive services for free. They don't charge. It's something they just do because they want to help. So I would start there first and see if you can find everything that you need there. Well, maybe not first, maybe second. First, learn to meditate and learn how to do these things yourself so that you can heal yourself. But if doing it yourself is problematic for some reason, then try the free route first, because often those are very good. It's not the case that because they're free that they're not as good. That's not it at all. Matter of fact, those healing circles are often more powerful than any one person would be, because there's 10 or 20 or 30 or sometimes more people all engaged in healing you. Well, that can be a very powerful thing. So it's, it's not true that you get what you pay for in this case. It's getting talented people to work on you or do the things you want is the issue. And they are available at no cost if you do some research. But there's also plenty of good people who do charge for their services, because everybody needs to make a living, and that's an honest living, is to provide services for people. So find out about them, get recommendations, talk to them, start small.
Well, Tom, you also asked about crystals. What is your information on crystals? Are there any benefits to those?
Well, there can be benefits to anything. Anything can have some benefit to it. I can hand you, a magic toothbrush, and if you feel very positive that this magic toothbrush is going to help heal you, it probably will. That's called the placebo effect. And the placebo effect actually heals. It is good medicine. So anything can have value. Now, people can use crystals as tools in their healing practice. Okay. Now they may tell you to take this crystal and put it under your pillow, or take this crystal and hold it in your hand, or take this crystal and hold it up to your forehead and turn around 3 times and jump up and down once. They may tell you things like that, and they may sound silly. And if you look at them, none of them may seem rational. But if that's part of their tool set, then it helps them focus their intent to help you. Okay? So it's not just necessarily about the interaction between you and their crystal. It's the interaction between you and the healing provider, the crystal, and you. If that healing person can do better healing if you're holding a crystal, well, that's a tool that they use to help them focus their intent on what they're doing. And therefore, it may be useful, to say, a crystal all by itself, without any human involved in it, is probably not going to do much for anybody about anything. But it's the person that's connected to the crystal and what you do and why you do it and their intent and how that crystal figures into their intent and everything else. The crystal may be valuable. So it's not the crystal itself that's the key. It's how that crystal affects your attitude and your sense of confidence and belief, and the practitioner's attitude and their confidence in what they're doing. So if you go to a practitioner and they use crystals or some kind of particular scents or magic oils or any other kinds of things, then I would do whatever the practitioner says to do it in the way they say to do it, follow directions. May not have anything to do with those tools, but those tools may have a lot to do with the practitioner's ability to be effective. So that'd be working with the practitioner to use whatever the stuff is that the practitioner says, because that's what they say. And then if you work with them, follow directions, and if that works, good. If it doesn't work, then by all means, tell the practitioner that. It helps them learn. Feedback helps them learn as well.
Well, thank you, Tom. I thought I would mention that there is an MBT outpouring page with a lot of healers in the MBT group. It's at Love Caring Healing on Facebook. And we also do a global healing once a month. You can sign up for that at MBT Events contact form. Let's, for the moment, go on to Guillaume. Guillaume has a couple of questions, and he's also on audio. Go ahead, Guillaume.
Hi, Tom. As a man, I always wonder if there was a direct correlation with my inner peace, emotions, global energy, and the way I experience sexuality in my life. To simplify the numerous questions I have on this subject, I would like to talk about semen retention in intercourse and the benefits from not masturbating for a male to lower the entropy of his consciousness. I've read a bunch of books on the subject of sexuality, and I'm really not sure what to think after reading a book by Mantak, whose name is Taoist Secret Love, Cultivating Male Sexual Energy. So to paraphrase really simply the idea in this book, Mantak say that each time we ejaculate, we lose as a man an enormous amount of potential energy that could contribute to depression, bad mood, low energy in daily life. Here's a quote that could resume the idea in the book. Sex essence is the source of all energy, alive for creative and thinking processes. There is another quote that I could add. It is from the canon of Taoist wisdom. If a man has intercourse once without spilling his seed, his vital essence is strengthened If he does this twice, his hearing and vision are made clear. If 3 times, all his physical illness will disappear. The 4th time, he will begin to fear inner peace, and so on and so on. Could you comment with some of your wisdom on those ancient Taoist tradition of semen retention from a celibacy perspective and maybe as a married life perspective as well?
Okay. I have read such things as well, too. Some in the tantric tradition also come to similar conclusions. Of course, as far as I know, there's not really been any serious scientific research done about this, so it's all pretty much speculation. So I think science really does have anything to say about it, since no research has been done. But from my own experience and understanding of reality and how it works and the mind and energy and so forth, I would disagree with those ideas. And the concept seems simple enough that sexual energy is a fundamental part of your energy. That's in the yin and yang viewpoint of life, where everything is broken down into male and female energy. Then the yang energy is the male energy, and that is supposed to be a very, very big part of your energy as a man. I don't buy that. So I would say that that's probably not the case. I can see the viewpoint that if you think that's the case and that your ejaculation decreases that energy because somehow that semen kind of is the physical representation of that energy, that then you would save it. And if you save it, it would grow. You're like putting money in a bank. The more money you put in the bank, the richer you are, and that it would just keep going like that. Well, that's an easy logic to follow, but it's based on, I think, a very faulty principle, and that semen has anything really seriously to do with your spiritual growth, your consciousness, or your energy as a human being. It's just physical stuff. It's virtual body. It's just a virtual body. Your thinking, your energy, your knowledge, your understanding, your compassion, your emotions, all of that's tied up in consciousness. Yes, the physical body has some connection with that because consciousness has to work through the physical body, and the physical body tends to rearrange itself to express the consciousness. So it's not that there's no connection between body and consciousness. There is a connection, but it's not that kind of a connection. It's not that the body creates spiritual energy or conscious energy. That's not the way that body consciousness link flows. It's not that the body creates spiritual energy or any other thing that's physical. The semen does not create this energy. The link actually runs the other way around. It's what's in consciousness affects the body. Consciousness is fundamental. The body is a subset. So from my viewpoint, I would find that is not the case, that it is probably counterproductive to your biology, because your biology was designed for reproduction. That's what your biology, those are your instincts, and that's what your biology, sexual biology is designed for reproduction. Reproduction requires ejaculation, not withholding it. So that's what you were designed to do as a physical animal, as a virtual animal in this simulation. And to go counter to that, I'd say is likely just to cause problems. And eventually that repression would add up, and instead of giving you great wisdom and health and wonderful benefits, I'd say it's more likely to give you problems, difficulties. Now, on the other hand, If you are really convinced that something's going to help, then you have a placebo effect. So if you're convinced that this is the way it works, and this, I'm going to feel better, I'm going to have more energy, then indeed you may get that as a byproduct. But that's the placebo effect working. If it actually, I don't think it would actually physically work out that way. The Eastern philosophies, I was going to say religions, but philosophies, which in the East, that's almost the same thing, philosophy and religion, they tend to have a lot of physical body metaphors, like chakras, right? You got 7 chakras in the body, and each one has a different place in the body and functions different things in the body. And of course, they also interface with the spiritual world and have things to do with consciousness and energy and so forth. These metaphors that use the physical body, I think, come about because it simplifies the concepts for the average person. The average person does not do well with highly, abstract, with highly abstract ideas. Most people just can't get their arms around those. But you give them something concrete to grab hold of, and they can work with that. So if you got rid of all the chakras and just had discussions of the different kinds of consciousness intentions cause what kind of things to happen and so on, there'd only be a very, very small handful of people that would deal with that successfully because it's just too abstract. If you give it body parts and you can, focus on these body parts and exercises for these body parts, now a whole lot more people can get involved in the process. And then you attach the consciousness part to it, the spiritual part to it. And again, a lot of people now can enter in the process. So I think these things have developed in order to make the teachings more widely available to more people, to give them something concrete to grab hold of. And once that gets started, then sometimes people pick up those concepts and run with them, do different things with them. And I think this is probably one of those. Well, okay, energy, that the energy and what's that, the root chakra, right? That's that's right in the groin. That's kind of the center of your sexuality as well. And that's got this energy and that energy. Now that you got that idea, even though that's just a metaphor, but if you take it as a fact rather than a metaphor, now you start making up other things that, you can work with that. Well, okay, I've got this root chakra stuff, and that has to do then with the semen and with sexuality and so on. And then you can start building up a whole program of body. You get to higher levels of consciousness. You evolve the quality of your consciousness by changing things in your body. Well, it doesn't work that way. In my mind, you don't improve the quality of your consciousness by changing things in your body, by doing or not doing anything physical. You get your quality of consciousness by making good choices, by being caring, by being cooperative, by loving, by helping, by getting rid of your fear. That's how you gain quality of consciousness. There's nothing that you can do. You can't physically do things that give you high quality consciousness. You got to earn that high quality through choice, through actions, through the way you interact with people. So, you can do these practices, which now makes everything easier. You don't actually have to go out and be nice. You don't have to go out and be cooperative. You don't really have to go out and love and care and not be upset and not get angry. All you have to do is not ejaculate. Well, that makes everything a lot simpler, doesn't it? Yes, okay. Well, you can get a lot more people to buy into that because it's kind of simple and straightforward, and you can do it, and you do this, and you get that. That's like the quick path to enlightenment. Well, that all rings false to me, but I can see how people did that, how they got some value out of it, mostly placebo value, how they, Well, let me back up. The the tantric philosophy actually makes sexuality a meditation. Now that's a little different. Sexuality becomes a meditation. Well, you can make anything a meditation. Meditation doesn't have to be saying a mantra or focusing on your breath. Mantra can be anything. A mantra can be anything. The thing that helps you meditate can be anything. Can be something you look at. People used to look at crystal balls because it was like looking at a field that had very little, kind of random definition, or candle flames, or tracing mandalas with their eyes, or listening to music, or how about the Sufi, dancing. Some people can meditate through movement. So there's lots of things that you can make anything a meditation. Anything. I mean, you can make eating an apple a meditation. You could sit down with your apple, and take one bite of it and then taste all the tastes and then the smells and let those, do this and that. You could take you a half an hour to eat an apple and you could turn it into a meditation. Anything that you can connect in your mind with relaxing, letting go, becoming one, with something else, then that's a good meditation. Well, you can make sexuality a meditation. That's this kind of the Tantra way. Now, in that case, it is a spiritual practice because it's a meditation. Unless, of course, you get more into the physical part of it than the spiritual part of it. And then it's just learning a lot of sexual control. And you kind of lose out on the spiritual end of it and it becomes something else. So it depends on how you approach it, what you do with it. So there's lots of connections between spiritual growth and sexuality that's in the literature. And most of it is just tools. Making sex part of a spiritual practice. Well, that's just making sex the tool. Like I said, you can make an apple part of a spiritual practice if you wanted to. You can make a statue of a Buddha part of your spiritual practice, or burning incense, or ringing of gongs, or you make all kinds of physical things part of your meditation if you want. And they can be effective parts. Tools can be effective. Just because it's not fundamental, like the chakras are not fundamental, they're tools. But that doesn't mean they aren't valuable. It doesn't mean they aren't effective. So it's not that you can't get there from here, but on the face of it, I'd say it rings very false to me. You don't become wise through not ejaculating. You don't become more highly evolved. You don't gain spirituality or truth or health through saving this, putting your male energy in the bank. None of that rings true. It's all physical stuff. Putting that physical energy in that's not the way it works. Consciousness works the other way around. Consciousness is fundamental. The physical is just an avatar. It's calculated. It's a computation in a computer, just like your elf, just like your Sims character. So if a Sims character doesn't ejaculate, is it going to make them wiser? Well, it doesn't make any sense, does it? It's a virtual reality. It just doesn't make any sense. So no, I'd say that's not the way it works. The consciousness logs onto the body. You evolve by pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, by caring, by having a strong intent to grow up, being part of the solution rather than part of the problem, by being positive. That's how you gain spiritual quality. And of course, meditation's on the path to that. Gets rid of some of the noise in your mind, lets you focus and concentrate better. So meditation's a good tool. But you can meditate and never grow up at all. Meditation doesn't make you grow up. It's just a tool that you can use to help you grow up. So not ejaculating isn't going to make you grow up or make you evolve or save your energy or make you more powerful. All of that is belief. Well, so now I started out saying that none of this is science. So, what I just told you is just Tom Campbell's viewpoint. It's my own sense of it from my own experience. That doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it wrong. It's just my viewpoint. on the subject. There's no real facts out there other than, personal testimonials, but personal testimonials are all full of bias through placebo and all kinds of other things. The testimonials aren't very valid. That they don't make scientific, evidence. So that's what I would think about that. Does that help?
Yeah, sure. That was fun to listen to your wisdom about that. Thank you for sharing. Just to pursue that kind of question about the relation between the body and mind. I mean, when we were talking about sexuality, having not really a link with the consciousness. But what about breathing? Because I think the way I see breathing is does that my breathing have a direct correlation with my consciousness? Because when I'm more calming, I breathe less. I have like six inhalation. By me, I'm calmer. There's less anxiety, so I'm able to make better decisions. So you quite understand what I mean by that?
Sure, absolutely. The body and the consciousness obviously are connected, and I said that, there's a connection there, and the body tends to change itself to better express the consciousness. The breath will change as you meditate, and the breath isn't the only thing. Your blood pressure decreases. The galvanic skin response, that's the conduction through your body of electrical currents. That goes up. You become a lot less conductive when you're in a meditation. All sorts of physical things happen when you're in a meditation state. Your EEG, your brainwave, tends to settle down into a theta state. So there's lots of, you wire somebody up with sensors and let them meditate, you'll find all sorts of things happen. That's because the mind gets in a very tranquil state of inner peace. Then so does the body. The blood pressure reduces, sometimes body even feels warmer. The person feels, kind of flush and their body feels warm. And anyway, yes, there are a lot of physical characteristics that go with consciousness state, but that's the body following the consciousness, not the body forcing the consciousness to be some way. That's what I say. The arrow here is pointing in the wrong direction. Consciousness can, modify the body. So let's say you are a person who, for example, let's say you're a person who tends to be negative and upset and complain a lot. Well, if you do that over years and years, what you will do is your body, in order to reflect that kind of a consciousness, will stop making so much serotonin. That's one of your neurotransmitters, stuff that your brain creates. Okay, so now you tend to be depressed. Okay, so your doctor says, oh, you're kind of depressed. Let me give you some Prozac or something else. And what Prozac does is it increases the amount of serotonin you have, increases the neurotransmitters. Oh, and you feel better now. But you see, the reason that you had the low serotonin wasn't because your body was defective. It's because the body was following the mind. Okay, but then you can take a pill, which then raises those transmitters up. Now the body doesn't reflect the mind so much anymore. But eventually it will, because then you'll start needing more of them. And the dosage will have to keep going up and up because you're still a negative person. And pretty soon you'll run out. You won't be able to take any more of them because now you get to the point where they're a problem if you take that much of them. Now you have to switch medications or do something else till you overcome that one. So anyway, there's lots of ways that there are connections between mind and body. But the arrow generally runs from the consciousness to the body, not the other way around. So people would think, well, no, look, I take serotonin. I take Prozac. That changes my behavior, changes my mind. My consciousness is not as negative. I'm a lot happier. Well, yes. But the reason you were not happy in the first place was because that was a problem you were having. Now we can boost that up, but eventually your mind will overcome that. Like I say, you'll need more Prozac and then even more Prozac. If you don't change, what you're doing is the medicine is modifying symptoms. It's not actually fixing causes. So, yes, there's a lot of connections like that. Mind does affect the body, and you can take a pill and affect, your level of consciousness. You seem suddenly, less upset with everybody when you take the pill. So it appears that it's going both ways, but mostly it goes in the way of the mind to the body, not the other way around. That's typically the way that goes. Now you can do things to the mind, or you can do things to the brain, let's say the physical thing, the virtual brain, that will affect what the conscious can do with the avatar. So somebody gets somebody gets hit in the head, causes their brain to be smacked, and now they slur their words and can't remember anything. So now the consciousness has to deal with an avatar that can't speak well and drags its leg. So now the conscious isn't hurt. The consciousness wasn't hurt, by that being hit, by that brain injury. Consciousness has nothing to do with the brain. But now consciousness has to play a hurt avatar. Its avatar can't speak. Avatar drags its foot. So that's what it has to play with now. Avatar can't function as well as it used to. That gives the conscious another whole set of choices to deal with that it didn't have before. So it's not that there isn't any connection between the two, but the connection that you're talking about with the not ejaculating, building up masculine energy that makes you more powerful and better healthy and a higher quality of consciousness, that's all going in the wrong direction. There isn't any physical thing you can do that makes you more enlightened, that gives you, that turns you into a being of love rather than one of fear. You can't do that. It's not like you can't take an anti-fear pill. Now, you can take a pill that makes you act less afraid, right? You can take a pill that seems to give you courage, but again, that's not real. It just makes you feel that way. It doesn't actually change anything. It doesn't change anything fundamentally. It just changes the symptom, the way you act. Okay. Hope
Thank
you
you,
find
Tom.
that. Yeah, you're welcome. Just Tom Campbell's point of view. Again, I'm not trying to say this is the way it is. You have heard the truth. That's not necessarily the case. You've just heard my opinion of it, because there's no science to produce any facts anywhere in this.
Tom Campbell here. INMBT Events. Hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.